mute you. And again, it's not because we don't care about you or your opinions, but because there's often a lot of feedback. If at any point you have any questions, feel free to type it into the chat. You can see on the bottom, there's a chat function. You can type in a question. Josh will be happy to answer any questions that you might have, and we'd love to hear from you. So again, I want to welcome you. If you don't have it already, feel free to grab your hiking hat, grab your hiking sunglasses. You can grab your water bottle, your sunscreen, and join us as we are going to go and hike up to Mount Sinai together. And I want to introduce my brother, Josh, who also goes by Shuki Hartuv. For those of you who didn't meet him last time or haven't met him until now, my brother made Aliyah in 2011. He served in Israel's Defense Forces in the Tzanchanim and the paratrooping unit. He lived on Kibbutz Sa'ad in southwestern Israel. He graduated from Israel's tour guide course and has guided many, many families and communities, including some of our families here at Anshe Emet. And what I will say is, Josh joked last time that we've been talking about we otherwise have ever gotten to speak. And we have gotten to have a lot of additional hangout time. Josh and I are incredibly close, but what has been particularly nice for me is he'll say something that I never heard, and just I feel like I'm going, like, my mind is blown constantly as Josh teaches me all about these various sites. So I'm really excited for the tour that we get to have and that we get to share together today. So as many of you know, next week we are going to be celebrating the holiday of Shavuot. Shavuot is the holiday when we, according to our tradition, is called Zman Matan Toratenu, the time when we celebrate receiving the Torah at Mount Sinai. We count all the days from Passover, from when we leave Egypt, from almost a month and a half ago, until we get to Mount Sinai, Har Sinai. And that's where we receive the Torah. That's why we're doing this whole tour. And the main thing that we're going to be talking about today is, first, Josh is going to give us a sense of the route that the Israelites took, taking us to Mount Sinai, trying to figure out a little bit what is the route, what is special about Mount Sinai in particular, and then talking about what Sinai and the desert means writ large. Why was the Torah given in the desert? What is special about the desert? What can the desert teach us and make meaning for us today? So with that in mind, I'm going to stop talking and pass it to my brother, Israeli tour guide, Josh.
I texted Dave, I'm like, is it perfect? He's like, well, it's your turn. But if he's
all right, great. Well, thank you so much, David. And I'm really excited to be back with you guys here at Anshe Emet. Can everyone hear me okay? I guess, Amy, we're doing okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I'm going to already start with sharing our screen. And again, kind of like what we spoke about a little bit before when we did our Yom HaZikaron tour, is part of what's really cool about doing virtual tours is that we get to go to places that you don't necessarily get to go to in real life. And so there's one advantage, which is getting to go to Sinai in a safe and, comfortable manner. And then the other benefit of being in the Sinai is that we get to go all over the Sinai without breaking a sweat. And even cooler than that is that we can go to places like this. We're in the middle of the Red Sea right now, while the sun is setting on our time in Yetziat in Mitzrayim, with the hundreds of years of slavery of Bnei Israel in Sinai, and we're looking in Egypt and Mitzrayim, and now we're looking towards this section over here, which is the Sinai Desert, just as Bnei Israel crossed the Red Sea. We just get to do it from the comforts of an oil rig, because that's what Google allows us to do, which is really fun. But as we're getting started, I'm going to show you two maps. One that's going to be a lot easier to understand, and one that's a little less easy to understand. The one that's less easy to understand is the one I'm going to start with. And the reason why I want to show you this one first is because it's absolutely gorgeous. This is a 16th century map of the route that the people of Israel took from Egypt, from the land of Goshen, where the Israelites were building the pyramids in this kind of area over here. This is the Nile River. This is the Great Salt Sea that's over here. This red body of water is of course the Red Sea, even though the Red Sea, as you can tell from the picture behind us, is actually blue, even though the sunset makes it look red in that kind of way. You can see the Pharaoh and his chariot are drowning in the sea. And if you looked really close, if you squinted really close, you could see Moses and his two horns, like from the famous painting with famous sculpture with the two horns shooting out of Moses' head. on this side of the Red Sea. And this green path is the path that Bnei Israel, that the people of Israel took through the Sinai Desert and a bit through the Negev Desert, and eventually going up alongside this Jordan, along this side of the Jordan, on the east side of the Jordan River, and then eventually crossing the Jordan River into Jerusalem, or crossing, I guess, into this area, the northern part of the Jordan Valley, and then eventually going towards Jerusalem, which is over here. Now, why am I showing you this map? This map is important for a few different reasons. One is that it points out a few different interesting spots along the route, and it shows a bit of the circuitous route that Bnei Israel took. It shows kind of the mountains that are over here, this being this mountain over here being Mount Sinai, and still doing a little bit of bobbing and weaving around to all the different places that they stopped along the deserts. But it's no accident that they did all this kind of bobbing and weaving in different places. Because when you're walking in the desert, you need to find water. You need to have water sources. And you need to have reasons for going to certain places. You need to get materials, raw goods. And those two things are probably the two most important things on a day-to-day basis. But the most important reason for being in the Sinai Desert, and also what we're going to talk about later on with the Negev Desert, is that there's some sort of spirituality that you get only in the desert and not in the regular green hill country over here or along the Nile. And that's going to be a theme that we're going to see when we leave the Sinai as well. When we go to all these different places where people are searching for something in the desert that's not just water and not just minerals, things to mine and sell all over the world, but there's going to be something that's special spiritually that people find in the desert. So that's that map. That's that map that's over here. Here's another map that is the map of again leaving from Goshen. This Israeli Haggadah map from the 1960s has them actually crossing this the Salt Lake that's over here. There's some theories that have Bnei Israel crossing actually this part of the Red Sea closer to where Eilat is today. Some people have Bnei Israel crossing the Mediterranean. We don't really exactly know where the crossing took place. Tanakh doesn't really give us the best image of that, but the general consensus, and it's not 100% sure, but the general consensus tradition that's been passed down for at least 2,000 years is that Mount Sinai is somewhere in the southern section of the Sinai Desert. And it's known as the Monastery of St Catherine, which we're gonna go take a look at a little bit later on. So again, we're doing the Pesach story right now, where we're moving from the Red Sea over to the Sinai Desert. And now let's look at the Sinai. Now the Sinai isn't just kind of big sand dunes. Growing up, I always imagined the Sinai Desert as, what you imagine in the movie of Prince of Egypt, where you have all these big sand dunes everywhere, and it's really uninhabitable. But in this region of the Sinai where we are right now, where we crossed the Red Sea, and now we're kind of in this southwestern region of the Sinai, we're in the area that actually has the most oases in the desert. And it's a place called Wadi Feiran. And this area has a lot of these oases. It's over here, where this is another beautiful image that comes from the 1800s, where you kind of get this sense of this is where people, a major station that people would have had to go to. So it would have made sense that the people of Israel would have crossed in this section of the Red Sea in order to land in a place where they get a few oases where they can get some water, even though the people did complain they didn't have enough water, so maybe they didn't actually land in that spot that's over there. The other thing I want to show you is actually a different map of the Sinai.
Josh,
Wadi Feiran
can you just go back to the map?
Sure.
And where is that relative to their journey?
So the journey would have been somewhere from over here in this area of the Nile Delta, crossing somewhere around in this area in the Red Sea, and they would have gone to Wadi Feiran, which is somewhere over here in the southwestern area of the Sinai Peninsula. And it shows up even a lot clearer actually on this map, which is actually a geological map of the Sinai. All the different colors show different groupings of rocks and different types of topography that you'll see in the Sinai, where this first little white dot that's over here is the Wadi Feiran area, where you see a whole bunch of different colors. That's because it's an area where all the water from all the different hill countries of the Sinai, from these tall mountains that are over here to these tall mountains that are over here, all collect in springs in this area of the desert. Where we're going to be going to Mount Sinai is just actually over here. And then where this white dot is where we are actually right now. This white dot is in this green belt. Now, what is this green belt that's over here? This green belt is primarily dolomite rock. And the dolomite rock has all these amazing different, it carries with it all these different minerals, the most famous of which were turquoise and manganese, which were really important minerals for Egypt, that the ancient Egyptians had set up mines in this area dating back to at least 2000 BCE. So we're talking a really, really long time that people have been using at least this section of the Sinai Desert, that it was known where to go. And it's no coincidence that in Tanakh, in the stories of Bamidbar specifically, and in Vayikra, we learn all the things that the Kohanim, that the priests had to wear, with all these gemstones representing the 12 tribes. And all that would have been found, again, here in the Sinai Desert, where you would have found all these precious stones after going to the Sinai to collect the most precious stones, which is the Luchot Abrit, the 2 tablets, which is what we're celebrating on Shavuot. But found in this area, which is, again, we're in this kind of south central area of the Sinai, we're in an area that's called the Sirbit El Khadim. Now, this area has all these stones with all these inscriptions. And in the place where we're standing, you can even see graffiti on the walls. That all this graffiti and those stones date back thousands of years, some of them dating back 4,000 years, with different forms of script that show that people were coming here to mine out in the desert. That they were kind of leaving their mark and explaining kind of what they're doing out in this part of the Sinai. And now we're moving on to the highest peak of the Sinai Desert, which is Mount Catherine. Now, Mount Catherine isn't Mount Sinai. Mount Catherine is the highest peak, not just in the Sinai Desert, but it's also the highest peak in Egypt. And it's even higher than any peak that you'd have in Israel, where we're standing at 2,629 meters above sea level, where the Mount Hermon, the tallest mountain in Israel, is at a 2,230 meters above sea level. So we're talking about 400 meters of difference between this mountain and the Hermon, the highest mountain in Israel. And the Mount Sinai, which I think is this one that's over here, but I'm not exactly sure based on this picture. It could be this one. But let's just pretend like I know exactly which one it is. Let's say it's this one. But so the Mount Sinai is also a tall mountain, taller than the Hermon as well, just by a couple of meters, 2,285 meters above sea level. But before we get into comparing all these different mountains, I'm going to turn the floor over to David, who's going to tell a little bit of a midrash about the specialness of the tall mountain, or not so tall mountain, of Sinai.
So I just want to say you all made it to the top of Mount Sinai. You guys did the hike perfectly. It's one of the easiest hikes you've maybe ever gotten to do. So yasher koach to you. We're going to be studying a midrash from Bamidbar Rabbah. So this is a teaching from our rabbis from about 1,500 years ago. And Josh and I were thinking about this midrash as we were talking about this tour. One of the more famous midrashim about Mount Sinai. And this midrash begins by quoting a verse from the book of Proverbs, which is sometimes how the rabbis like to create these midrashim, how they create these stories, is by starting with a verse from another book until they come back to make their interpretation on the story at hand. So it starts, Ga'avat adam tashbilenu, a person's pride will bring that person low. So that's a few words from the book of Proverbs. So now they're going to make a whole midrash, a whole creative rabbinic story about those words. This verse applies, Zet Tavor ve'Karmel. This verse applies to two of the tallest mountains in Israel, to Har Tavor and Har Carmel, Mount Tavor and Mount Carmel. Because these mountains came from the end of the world and they boastfully proclaimed, we are high, and the Holy One will give the Israelites the Torah on our mountaintops because we're the tallest mountains. So there's this midrash that imagines mountains having a fight over who's going to get to give the Torah to, who's going to get to be the host of the giving of the Torah to the Jewish people. And then they go back to the book of Proverbs, quoting the second part of the verse, which is, Ushval ruach yitmoch kavod, But the person of lowly spirit, that person will have honor. That person will be honored. This applies to Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai said, I am low, I am humble. And because of this, God placed, and this is meant to be a wordplay, the person yitzmochu will attain is a wordplay on tamach, that God placed or bestowed. So God placed God's glory on Mount Sinai. The Torah was given on Sinai and merited all this honor because it was the one that was humble. And what's the proof text? If you read Exodus 19, which we read on Shavuot, it says, Vayered Adonai al Har Sinai. God came down to Mount Sinai. What are the rabbis doing when they interpret this? Well, they're saying God is hanging out here in heaven, and here are the mountains, which are right behind me in here that you can see. If God was going to Har Carmel and Har Tavor, to these other mountains, those, according to our rabbis, which is not according to the geology that Josh just described, they thought Tavor and Carmel were much taller than what they imagined Mount Sinai to be. And so according to this Midrash, if God had to give the Torah to the Jewish people on Carmel or on Tavor, God would barely have had to bend down to give the Torah to those mountains. But Sinai, which is a much smaller and humbler mountain in the rabbinic tradition, God really had to bend over to pass that Torah down to the Israelites, to the Jewish people. So we brought this Midrash because it all has to do with how tall are these mountains. And what's interesting is the rabbis were thinking about that and were talking about that. And they didn't always have the geological information, right? That actually Mount Sinai and the mountain range of Mount Sinai seems to be much taller than the mountain range that Josh was talking about of Hermon or Carmel or Tavor. I'll pass it back to Josh.
Yeah, so to build a little bit on that, David, the rabbis in a way aren't wrong. That even though Mount Tavor and Mount Carmel are much, much, much lower mountains, they're between 500 and 600 meters above sea level. They're really short mountains in that kind of way. So we're talking, I don't know, I'm trying to do quick math in my head. Something like 4 to 5 times shorter than Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai, which is, again, one of these two mountains that's over here, is actually in a way kind of nondescript. Because even though it is the 3rd or 4th highest peak in the whole Sinai Desert, the prominence of the mountain itself is only 332 meters, which means that Carmel and Tavor, which sit in valleys, that the prominence of those mountains, they really stick up, that their height is their prominence, that they're 500, 600 meters above sea level, and that's exactly their prominence as well. While Mount Sinai is part of a range that the prominence is actually kind of low, that depending on your belief of if the rabbis knew or cared to know where Mount Sinai was, if they didn't think that, if they would have known that this was the mountain, they wouldn't have been wrong that Mount Sinai didn't feel like a very high mountain in that kind of way. So we're actually going to move away from Mount Catherine and look at Mount Sinai, or first look at Mount Sinai itself from up close, where now that we're at Mount Sinai up close, I'll now get into the first of a series of images that my Ima and Abba, that my parents took when they were in the Sinai Desert in 1979, just before the peace agreement was signed, just before the peace agreement was signed between Israel and Egypt, where it was unclear if tourists were going to be able to so freely go to Mount Sinai. My parents got to go there during that winter, and they got to take a look up close at Mount Sinai. So this is one of a series of pictures with their high-resolution iPhone cameras. So it's a nice way to look at it, but what's really cool is down below. That's over here. And what's down below the mountain is this incredible monastery that dates back to at least the 4th century, where there's some images that date back, again, this is from 1762, and here's another image from 1855 after it got to get a little bit bigger. What's amazing about this monastery isn't just that it's a really old monastery. It happens to be the oldest active monastery in the world. And it's not by accident. This old active monastery that's over here, the St. Catherine's Monastery, is able to remain active throughout all the transitions and turmoil in the Middle East from different conquerors coming in and out, because already from the rise of Islam in the 630s, when Muhammad is making, Muhammad is kind of making waves in Saudi Arabia and in the deserts and all that area, even before the Caliph Omar comes in 638 and conquers the land of Israel itself, the monks who lived in Sinai had already sent a letter to Muhammad himself and asked, hey, listen, we're this really special monastery that's here in Mount Sinai, which is a really holy mountain to us, just as it's a holy mountain to you, this new upstart religion, which is kind of an offshoot in a way of Christianity and Judaism. Maybe you can protect us. Maybe you can make sure that we stay here, that we're going to keep this tradition of our monotheist religions alive. And Muhammad writes a letter back and says, Islam, this new religion, this Muslim religion, will never harm the St. Catherine's, the Mount Sinai Monastery. And that remained a Muslim tradition all through the Ottoman Empire, up through the 1900s, when the Ottomans in the 1600s thought about coming down to the Sinai and destroying the monastery and turning it into a mosque, turning it into a village in a way, a Muslim village and a mosque. But instead, they looked back to this tradition and they kept it as a Christian monastery. And then, are there roads to get to the monastery? Yes, there are roads that can take you to the monastery. Now, the other interesting fact about the monastery that also kind of goes to this same idea, the same concept, is that when the Crusaders came to Israel, to the Holy Land, to conquer all these different sites, the Crusaders came to this monastery, which is a Greek Orthodox monastery, and they left it as a Greek Orthodox monastery. They did not make it Catholic. And again, there's some sort of way that, some sort of mysticism of these monks that are over here that have protected some sort of sense of religious tolerance between Catholics and Orthodox, between Muslims and Christians, even though these were all during times that were very tumultuous through all of that. This is just a really cool image I wanted to show you of the snow from just this past year, where it snows in this area once every 5 years or so in the Sinai. And so this past year, with the very rainy and cold winter that Israel got to have, it snowed this year. There was a question of how many people live in the monastery. There's about 100 or so people that live in the monastery. And what's cool in the monastery, there's also a library where in the last 200 years, there was discovered a few different scrolls, some of which being the oldest copies of the New Testament ever found. And again, it's similar to like the Dead Sea Scrolls, that being in these kinds of desert conditions, the scrolls, the papyrus preserves a lot better. And now we're climbing up what's called Jabal Musa, or Mount Sinai. We're climbing Mount Sinai. Are there food supply locally grown or imported? They do have some locally grown things, but it's mostly imported. Again, going back to the series of images from my Naba, you can see as we're making this climb up Jabal Musa or Mount Sinai, you can see down below, bathed in the sunlight, the St. Catherine's Monastery. All the images that we see on Mount Sinai are actually taken not by people going up the mountain, but actually people going down the mountain, right? You can see this person is actually walking down, not going up. The reason being is because when you make the trek up Mount Sinai, you always start at 2 in the morning, and it takes around 4 hours to climb up the 3,700 stairs that take you all the way up. And here's my Naba climbing up these stairs. This is one of a series of arches that throughout Mount Sinai, there's all these different arches and little tiny chapels that mark the different holy sites on Mount Sinai that are holy to Christians, for Christian saints, but also marking different holy sites dedicated to stories from the Old Testament, from the Jewish Bible, from stories of Eliyahu Hanavi and his journey to the Sinai, and of course, Moshe and Aharon. Where the mountain that's across from the Sinai, this one that's over here, is the mountain that is dedicated, or the story of Aharon making the golden calf, that took place on the mountain across from Mount Sinai, across from where the St. Catherine's Monastery is. And now we're further up, we keep on climbing up Mount Sinai. You can see down below, this is kind of like the base camp that's over here, where there's a little bit of a kiosk where you can get some food, where you can rest. Some people like to sleep for the day, or to hang out in the day in that little place. And we're again climbing up these stairs that are over here, which archaeologists to this day don't know how old these stairs are. Most people think the stairs were made by those first monks in the 4th century, but there's some people that say that those steps were there long before that, which means that people have been using this site as a pilgrimage site for a very, very, very long time. And up at the top of Mount Sinai, wow, what great climbers you all are. You guys did such a good job. Up at the top of Mount Sinai, you can see that there's a small little church that's over here. Across from the church, you have a mosque. And in between, we've got a nice picture of Abba, nice picture of Joel Goldberg, Dr. Goldberg. I guess before he was a doctor, but I guess Master Joel Goldberg of psychology, who's davening with his tefillin and his siddur that's over here, with the mosque just in the background that's over there. Now, what's interesting about this complex over here with a church and a mosque that both, have been side by side for hundreds of years, is that they're both built on the foundations of, you see all these, all the foundations that are around the side, that all these foundations are actually from a much earlier church. That was a church that was built in the 600s. In the late 500s, in the 6th century. That was just a church. And then when the Muslim conquering came, they ended up building a mosque to go side by side with it, eventually in the 9th or 10th century. But now that we're up at the top of Mount Sinai, I turn the floor over to David to give us another quick midrash.
Yeah, so what's interesting is our rabbis have this real interesting tension as they are imagining what's the role of Sinai, and is the role of Sinai and the Torah meant to be a particular gift to the Jewish people, and there are plenty of midrashim about that, or is the Torah meant to be this universal gift, this gift to the entire world? And so this is a midrash from the Mechilta. This is a 2,000-year-old midrash, a 2,000-year-old story. And it picks up on, again, the scene that we read on Shavuot from Exodus chapter 19, verse 7, where it says, Vayachanu bamidbar, and there they camped out in the desert. And our rabbis want to try and figure out, why is it that the Israelites were given the Torah in the desert? Why wasn't the Torah given in Jerusalem? Right? It would have made a lot more sense if it was where the temple was going to be. Or why didn't it happen the first second they got out of Egypt, or the second right after they crossed the sea? Why is it in the desert that the Torah is being given? And so our rabbis teach the Torah was given openly, in a public place. For if the Torah were given in the land of Israel, they could say to the nations of the world, you have no portion in it. The Torah is just for us. But no, it was given openly in a public place, and all who want to take it may come and take it. There's this interpretation of the rabbis which says that the Torah is meant to be some kind of exchange between that's not reserved for the Jewish people, that is between the Jewish people and other nations. And Josh can speak more to it, but I think that midrash really echoes a lot of what you've said until now, Josh, about how even Mount Sinai is set up, how it's been in history, and how it is today. That for almost 2,000 years, other religions or other denominations have respected St. Catherine's Monastery, or there's a monastery and a mosque that is up there. Or in the 70s, seeing this mosque and this church and somebody who's Jewish all being able to pray on this mountain. And I think that's just a really powerful and poignant message to think about leading into Shavuot. How is the Torah a particular gift for us as the Jewish people? And what does it mean to take seriously this notion of the rabbis and some of the way that Mount Sinai itself has lived, which is out there in the world, there might be so much tension and strife and battling between religions. But on this place, on this holy mountain, there is this sense that everybody comes and is able to worship all together.
So yeah, just to reiterate that point again, this is what's really beautiful about the Sinai, is that, and about the desert in general, and this is going to be the theme of the next half of the tour that we're going to be doing, is that it's not just a phenomenon to Mount Sinai that we're on right now, that all these people can come together and worship in peace and enjoy the sunrise in peace. But it's a phenomenon that you see throughout the Negev as well, and throughout the Sinai, that as people are trekking through the desert, they become inspired. And the inspiration doesn't come from, political aspiration, but they become inspired to work together, maybe because of survival reasons, that there isn't that much water, there isn't that much food, and they have to cooperate. But maybe it's also combining that with some sort of spiritual reason, that being out in the desert gives you that way to sit and relax and to bond with people. And that's really the next theme of where we're going next, where we are right now is we have now moved again across the Red Sea down towards Santa Caterina, where Mount Sinai is, and now we're going to move all the way up to the eastern part of the Sinai, and we're going to be next to this place called Kunta the Druid, which I'm going to explain to you all about in just a second. But before that, David and I wanted to give you a quick little interlude with a really fun song that we could have played it, on Spotify or something, but I thought it would be even more fun with the ukulele. המדבר מדבר, אומר לך להיות שמח, מזכיר לך שהכל פורח אצלך בלב. המדבר מדבר, אומר לך להיות שמח, מזכיר לך שהכל פורח אצלך בלב. The desert speaks and tells us to be happy. It reminds us that everything can bloom within your heart. We're going to see a little bit later on that things can actually bloom on the ground itself. So thanks for putting up with my late at night voice. But where are we going right now? So
Josh, I just want to interrupt. It's a beautiful song for those of you who want. For Josh, you sang it beautifully, and thanks to the ukulele. And for those of you, if you want to listen to the song after the presentation, Hamid Barma the Bear, it's really a beautiful song.
All right, perfect. So again, we're up in this area called Kunta the Druid, which is a really, really weird archaeological site. That after 1967, when Israel conquers the Sinai Desert, Israel got to do a little bit of digging around and trying to find different ancient Israelite sites. And the most interesting one that they found is this one, again, that's all the way down in the Sinai, which is far away from the kingdom of Judah and even further away from the kingdom of Israel, which we know from Tanakh about how there's a division between the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. But what's interesting is when they dug this place that's even south of Kadesh Barnea, that when they dug it up, they found all these really interesting things. So this is an image of Kunta the Druid, which I couldn't get a good Google image shot for the main shot, but we got to do it from this. That's Kunta the Druid that's over there. And one of the interesting things that they found was they found, first of all, on pieces of pottery, they found these images of different gods. One being kind of the god of Baal, the god of rain, the Canaanite god. This image over here being God like Adonai, like God of Israel. And this over here being the Ashterot, or Asherah, which is kind of the wife of God, which is, I'm not going to get into the whole biblical criticism and kind of get into the whole history of all these things, but there was all throughout Tanakh, there's a Chizkiyahu and Yoshiyahu are always trying to destroy all the different gods that people had, including the Ashterot, including this wife of God that people sometimes associated with the God of Israel, even though they were supposed to be always monotheists. And another thing they found that's very interesting, they found this image on a piece of pottery, which is actually the only image we have of an Israelite or Judahite king. And this is actually King Yehoash, who you can see from the bottom over here, ruled from 800 BCE to 786 BCE, who was a king of Israel, not a king of Judah. You'd expect that looking at the map over here, that if there was anyone that was going to control places in the Sinai, it would be the kingdom of Judah. But if there's anything that archaeologists in Israel over time have discovered, is that though Tanakh tries to portray Judah and Jerusalem as being the powerhouse of the two kingdoms, the kingdom of Israel was really the big international powerhouse. And Judah was a lot more insular in a way. And the reason why Judah ends up surviving is because it's mostly in places that people don't really care to conquer. While the northern kingdom of Israel has lots of trade routes that go through it. It has lots of great farmland, lots of water, a place where Assyria and any number of different places, Aram, Damascus, are always going to try to conquer little bits and pieces of it at the very least. And it turns out that the kingdom of Israel, as they discovered in Kunta the Druid, had some sort of mining or some sort of interest in the Sinai Desert. And again, that's what they found that's over there, where they found ancient Israelite writing. This is ancient Hebrew that's over here. They found the image again of Yehoash, and they found images of Israelite gods out in the desert. And this idea of Israelite gods in plural, I know it sounds really jarring, especially when we're talking about Shavuot, and this is the ultimate of all of our holidays where we're really talking about monotheism, of God giving us Matan Torah, and not multiple gods. There's this really funny phenomenon that takes place in the desert. That's not just limited to Kunta the Druid, where they found, in a way, multiple gods. Here we are right now in Arad. Now, Arad, during the time of the Kingdom of Judah, was kind of the southernmost military outpost. You can see kind of Bethlehem up here. Jerusalem is a little bit further up, a little bit further to the north. Arad and Beersheba were known essentially as the southernmost outposts of the Kingdom of Judah. And what they found in these outposts, both in Beersheba and Arad, is they found, I want to show you this image first. Sorry, third time's a charm. Found this funny looking building that's over here. Now in this building, the archaeologists measured it out and they noticed that it shares the exact same dimensions as what is outlined in the Mishkan, or outlined in Vayikra, as how to build the Mishkan. It's the same, width and length. The Mizbeach that's over here, the altar that's over here, is made with uncut stones. It's all natural found stones. Shares the exact same dimensions as the Mizbeach as well, which means that you have these, basically they're building a Beit HaMikdash in a way, but further away from Jerusalem, because it might have been hard to get to Jerusalem. So people in the south would have been able to sacrifice here. And even cooler than that is in this section, where my mouse is, that's over there, is a little miniature Holy of Holies, a little Kodesh HaKodashim, where the archaeologists found this pillar and this pillar right next to each other, buried, where the bigger one that's over here, in a way, represents God, Adonai, and this one may represent, the smaller one may represent God's wife, Asherah. Now, we know that from Tanakh that the people of Israel only have one God. But if that's a law that keeps on getting repeated over and over and over and over and over again, it must mean that there was some sort of driving force that kept on, that the people of Israel kept on wanting to worship, whether it was Baal or Asherah, in addition to the one God. So there's some sort of kind of drive to have polytheism, or not necessarily polytheism, but influence of other gods. And this is another phenomenon that we find with another group of people in the desert who are known as the Nabataeans. Now, the Nabataeans built this incredible city called Avdat. Avdat is named after the Nabataean god Obadah. Now, who are the Nabataeans? The Nabataeans, just to backtrack a little bit, are the masters of the desert. Nabataeans, historically, the only people that call themselves Nabataeans starts around 300 BCE, and it continues until around the year 300 CE. But they were probably around long before that. Because what are the Nabataeans? They're essentially masters of the desert trade. They were people who brought incense and spices from Oman and from Yemen, from down here in the bottom of Saudi Arabia, south of Saudi Arabia, through the treacherous desert of the Arabian Desert, through the Negev Desert and the Sinai Desert to the port in Gaza, where they could then export all of these spices all over the world. Now, what's so important about spices, that everyone needed spices everywhere, specifically frankincense and myrrh, which again, all over Tanakh, you have mor levana, frankincense and myrrh, amongst all these other spices that are so important. Why do people need spices so badly in the ancient world? Because everyone is sacrificing to gods. And you have all these animals getting slaughtered and sacrificed, and there's going to be a lot of nasty smells everywhere with all the animals. So you need the incense to make the smells a little bit better. And so you would think that actually with the rise of, in a way, the rise of Christianity over the Roman Empire, when the sacrifices stop, that the spice trade might come to an end, which we're going to get to a little bit later on. But the Nabataeans essentially were these masters of the desert where they could find water out of nothing. And again, the capital being Petra with all the great castles, which I'm sure some of you have been to Petra before, where they built these amazing water cisterns in the middle of the Negev desert, or in the middle of the desert everywhere, where these water cisterns could feed, again, we could drink thousands of camels in these caravans, but they're also hidden from plain sight in a way. You can drive right by this on a highway and not see it because it's covered with all these shrubs and it's kind of hidden in a valley with this secretly redirected water to get into these big holes. So that way only the Nabataeans would know where to access this water. Now the Nabataeans are an interesting group of people. Again, we're back in Avdat over here, where they built this huge, massive city. And as the masters of water, they even managed to have agriculture, where you can see over here, the green that's over here next to Avdat is actually a project that started in the 1950s under the direction of David Ben-Gurion to try to figure out how to farm in the desert and use ancient techniques like what the Nabataeans did to try to see how they managed to farm in the desert. Now, how do they know that they farm so well? You see this big block that's coming off of the desert. This is a tour I took a few people a few months ago before all of Corona hit. Where this is actually a huge wine press. They actually managed to grow wine, and not just a little bit of wine. Each of these little cells could hold 100 or so liters of wine, of grapes, that they would squish and put all together and eventually collect. And this is one of 5 different wine presses. The most impressive of the wine presses. There's 5 different wine presses that they found in Avdat itself. Now, what's the cool thing about Avdat? Is that Avdat, at a certain point, gets another name, which is known as Obadat Jupiter. The name Jupiter sounds like a bit of a funny name to put next to Avdat. Avdat is or Obada is the chief god of the Nabataeans, who are polytheistic. When the Romans come, and they're the, commanders in a way of this region, so they say, okay, fine, we'll adopt your gods too. And there's an inscription of Obada Jupiter. And then when the Christians come along, all of a sudden, all these Nabataean cities have these impressive churches built everywhere with baptismal pools and all these amazing things. And you can see all over the place where the Nabataean cities were. This is a kind of a zoom in on the rest of kind of the Negev desert, where this is Avdat that's over here. We're about to go to Mamshit, which is just over here, and Shivta and Nitzana. All these places have at least 2 churches. And why do they have these churches if they're polytheists? Because the Nabataeans didn't really care what god they worshiped. They wanted some sort of spirituality to kind of get them through these long marches. But most importantly, if the Byzantines were the ones who were ruling the desert, fine. As long as you guys pay us to march through the desert, we'll worship whichever god you want. But this kind of goes back to the theme of the Mount Sinai as being this place where all these religions can come together and just ignore differences for the sake of whether it's holiness or economics or water. They can all get along in the desert. There's some sort of peace that can happen here. And so that's what you find in all these places. That the Nabataeans got along great with the ancient Romans, the ancient Israelites, with the ancient Christians as well as they got along with the Hasmoneans, the Maccabees, where they were also dealing with the Nabataeans during all these different trade from thousands of years ago. And the last place I really want to take you is this other Nabataean city, which is called Mamshit, where again, there's these gorgeous, stunning mosaics, which I actually took my Abba here and my wife Abby a long time ago, but we didn't have a picture of all 3 of us together, which would have gone really well with our theme of having, pictures of my Ima and Abba in the desert. But anyways, you have these amazing churches that are over here. But what's interesting about Mamshit is that it's a huge, massive city that has a bathhouse where you can actually see these frescoes that are still inside the arches over here. You have a horse's stable, which again could drink around 100 horses at a time in there. You also have a huge water system where the Nabataeans managed to figure out, they even had to build a dam in the middle of the stream because they were collecting so much water. Now, why did they do all of this in Mamshit? What is so amazing about Mamshit? Why did they build a place in the middle of the desert in Mamshit? And the answer to that might come from this map. Now, this map is the funniest looking map you'll ever see because it's actually a church floor. from a church in Jordan. It was built in the 500s, and it's called the Church of Madaba or Medva. And it's really important, and it's most famous for its depiction of Jerusalem, which is this little section that's over here, where it's actually a really accurate geographic map of the Holy Land, where some of the bits are missing, like this bit that's over here is missing because when the Crusaders came, they decided to plop a whole bunch of pillars onto the mosaic, so it destroyed a lot of the Byzantine images that's over here. But let's move away from Jerusalem. You can see the Dead Sea that's over there, and the Jordan River. And if we go even further to the south, you can see Mount Sinai, and you can see the Nile. And if you go straight north from Mount Sinai, you get to this little blob over here, which you're gonna have to trust me, but it says the word Memphis, which is how Mamshit, whatever, it's complicated how Mamshit got its name, but you have this name of a city called Memphis, which is where we're standing right now. Now, why is Mamshit so famous and why is it so important to be built here? Now you have to remember, going back to before, when we were looking at Avdat, we had all these amazing trade routes and all these little stations that are all along the way. You have Mamshit that's over here and Avdat that's over here, which makes sense when there's a spice trade, when there's a spice route. But with the rise of Christianity taking over the Roman Empire, no one's doing sacrifices anymore. The only real need for the frankincense and myrrh is for when, the priests or the monks would be kind of carrying the incense maybe through the church, but that's not enough to sustain this huge spice trade. So the spice trade come the 4th century, 5th century, with the rise of Christianity, completely collapses. But that doesn't mean that these cities of Avdat and Mamshit collapse. This is actually the greatest peak of these amazing desert cities, including the building of St. Catharine's, the Monastery of St. Catherine's. So why is that all of a sudden? Because in the deserts, it's not just about navigating and finding water and farming and all these things. The real drive for the desert is that quest for spirituality. It's that quest to find Mount Sinai. Whether you're Christian or Jewish or Muslim, there's something special about the desert that can bring people together, and something special about the desert that can bring that spirituality that people are looking for. And to kind of finish our tour, again, this is Ein Avdat, one of the most beautiful hikes you can do in Israel. To finish our tour, I'm going to pass the floor over to David, where he's going to give us a little bit of a midrash on Shira Shireen, which is a book that is written all about Ein Gedi, which is, again, another desert oasis right next to Yam HaMelech, the Dead Sea. So David, I'll pass this over to you.
So there's a midrash, a rabbinic teaching that is based on one of the verses in Shira Shireen. The verse says, Mizot olamin hamidbar mitrapeket al doda. Who is she? Who is this woman who is coming up from the desert? Mitrapeket, on her beloved. And what's interesting is we don't know exactly what that word mitrapeket, what it means. Mitrapeket is what is called in literature a hapax legomenon, which means a word that appears only once in a body of literature. So the word mitrapeket appears only once in the entire Hebrew Bible. So our rabbis want to figure out, they never like mysteries, they want to figure out what the word means. And the problem with the word only showing up once in a body of literature is you have nothing to compare it to. So you kind of have to guess at what it means. So here's what the rabbis think this means. So let's remember, the original verse is, there are two lovers, and one lover sees the other coming up from the desert. So the rabbis teach a mashal, a parable. Lemi shenasa isha, to a man who went to marry a woman, ve'amarla, and he said to her, Tsi'i v'hitkadshili bamidbar, come and marry me in the desert. They're going to have a destination wedding. They're going to elope in the desert. Kevan she'atza lamidbar, when she left for the desert, amralo, she said to him, Sa'ini al gabech, I can't fully make the journey on my own. Carry me on your back. Who is this woman? That is the people of Israel. Who is the king? That is God. When Israel left for the desert, Israel said to God, carry them on your wing. It's quoting from a verse of Deuteronomy, which says that God lifted us up on wings of eagles. So what is this midrash trying to say? That in the desert, we also can't get through it alone. I think going back to what Josh started to talk about, it's not easy living in the desert. When you're in the desert, it might be easier to actually come together with people because you're thinking about your survival. And so we read this midrash, this rabbinic story, which says sometimes we're stuck in a desert. Sometimes we're stuck in a place that is hard and we can't get through it alone. And so our rabbis say, Sa'ini al gabech. Sometimes we need somebody who will carry us through. When we read this verse from the Song of Songs, the way they translate this is, who is she that comes up from the desert, being carried, being supported by her beloved? So actually, Josh, if we go to the next slide, Yehuda Halevi was one of the Jewish people's greatest poets. And he quoted this very word of mitra peket. And this is a word that my wife Rebecca and I used on our wedding invitation. And the way that he uses this in his poem is he says, she found for herself a nest in your heart, delighting herself in you, umitra peket, and leaning on you, being supported by you. And so when he uses this verse, he talks about what does it mean to find love? It's finding delight in each other and also support. We all recognize that there are times in our lives where we need help, where we need somebody who can pick us up and who can help us carry us through to get to that next moment. And I think that's what stands out about this particular verse and this desert experience, is that in times when we need help, we need to find somebody who will be there to help lift us up. So Josh, I'll pass it back to you if there's anything else you want to say, and then I'll say a couple last words.
Yeah, I guess the final thing I wanted to leave everyone with, because, I'm still love Zionism and Israel more than anything, I guess other than my daughter and wife and family, but that's besides the point. But one of the things I love most about one of the greatest Zionists, David Ben Gurion, is that he points out that all throughout Tanakh, whenever the people are going to the desert, it's always Olim la Negev and Olim la Midbar, that you're always going up to the desert and going up to the Negev specifically. And it's not just that topographically, generally you are going up because the Negev highlands are higher than the rest of the country in Israel, but also because there's some sort of spirituality and holiness that's there that we're always looking for. Again, this green patch in the Negev, and it's always more beautiful and holier than you could ever possibly imagine of any place where it's easy to find the green and the water in the north of Israel. But so before I pass it on to David to give a final conclusion, I'll just say thank you to all of you guys for putting up with me, and I hope you guys all enjoyed. And feel free, again, on my name over here, you can use @HeartSoup_Tours. You can leave me a review on Facebook or on TripAdvisor, finding me @HeartSoup_Tours. And you can email me, josh@heartsouptours.com, if you ever wanted to get in touch with me about anything you might need in the future in Israel, whether it's guiding or doing these kinds of virtual tours and things like that. But again, I had a really special and wonderful time with you, thinking about Shavuot and thinking about holiness in the Negev and in the Sinai and with Mount Sinai with you guys here with Anshe Emet. And I hope to see you guys again soon. And I'll turn the floor over to David, and then I'm happy to take questions afterwards from any of you guys.
So first, I want to say, Josh, thank you. Thank you for all the time you spent in preparing this for such an informative and interesting and very timely session as we prepare for Shavuot. Thanks, Josh. I also want to thank all of the members of our synagogue. Our members, whether it's through membership or donations that you've made, have really helped to underwrite this program and made it possible for us to do it. For anybody, we don't ask for a program fee, but we do hope you'll consider making a donation to our sustaining fund in honor of this program. And it's donations that allow us to do such compelling programming and to be able to offer it to both members of our community and beyond. So for anybody who's available, we really appreciate any gifts that help us do that. I want to make sure you know about all the other really great programming that we have coming up. Tonight, we have a lot tonight. Tonight at 7 o'clock, we have the music of Shavuot with Chazan Mizrahi, Chazan Berkey, and Naomi Weiss, our ritual director. Also tonight at 8:30, Rabbi Chankin Gould is leading a study on a rainbow thread, Noam Sienna's book. So that'll be tonight at 8:30. And also on Wednesday night at 7 p.m., Rabbi Siegel is having a conversation with Dr. Ron Wolfson, one of the leading rabbinic thinkers of today. So we invite you to join us for that. And we also want to make sure you know of a new thing that we're starting up, that we're trying out, called Beyond the Bima. It's a chance for you to have some informal schmooze, sort of like office hour time with the clergy. So I'm going to be doing a happy hour on Thursday at 4 o'clock, Rabbi Chankin Gould on Friday at 11 a.m., and with Rabbi Siegel on Tuesday at 1 p.m. So we hope that you'll join us for that. And finally, I want to give a big thank you to the one and only amazing Amy Karp, who's been organizing all of these programs. If you want to give a round of applause or thumbs up to Amy for putting it all together. Amy, we are so grateful for all of your incredible hard work. And finally, I hope that you'll join us for all of the Shavuot programming that we have coming up the following week. The whole goal of this is to get us excited for Shavuot and to think about what it was like for our ancestors to be at Har Sinai, at Mount Sinai. So we hope that you will join us as we imagine what it was like to stand at Sinai as we stand there together. There will be a recording that Amy will be posting on our website, and you can reach out to her if you can't find it. And I know Josh and I will be hanging out here for a little while for anybody who has questions or wants to hang out. Thank you all for joining us, and everybody have a great day.
All right, if anyone has any questions, feel free to shoot. And my email, I think, is still here too if you want to ask her about her trip in 1979. But you can also ask me anything about the tour itself, and I'm happy to reopen up the slideshow if people needed to use that as a reference for any of the questions that they might have.
Josh, I was also there in the summer of 1979.
Oh, wow. Wow.
We have a bunch of folks. I know Rhonda said she was there, and Eleanor was there, and Laurel was there. There were anybody else who's been?
Yes, I was there in December of '79 and went to many places you can't get to anymore.
I was there in 70
Oh, Sarah.
on my gap year. We did a kibbutz tiyul over Pesach to the Sinai.
I was.
It may date me, but I was there in 72, 74, and 79.
I was in the Sinai in 74 and
in 1970, it must have been very dangerous to go in the Sinai in 1970. There was a lot of action there then.
They took us. We were on kibbutz at the time, and they decided it was safe enough. I remember it being very hot.
Yeah.
When we were traveling from Jerusalem to Sfat, and as we're driving, we hear airplanes above us, and all of a sudden we hear these loud booms, and we look out, and what they were dropping was not bombs, but these huge bags of powder while they were practicing to drop bombs. So it was pretty exciting, and we ended up staying. We arrived at night, so I didn't know where we were. We woke up in the morning. They said, just walk down the hall, and there were Israeli troops having their breakfast. So it was pretty exciting.
Well, if any of you guys want to watch a really amazing Israeli movie that's set in the Sinai, probably one of the most famous Israeli comedies, which is called Givat Chalfon, which was just recently turned into a play that was featuring at Habima in Tel Aviv up until the coronavirus hit and everything. But I'm sure some of you have even seen it, but it has the famous line, it's about soldiers in the middle of the nowhere in the Sinai Desert complaining about doing Miluim reserve duty. And there's the famous line of, well, what's gonna happen if we get attacked? Oh, we'll do the same thing we did in 73. Well, what did we do in 73? The same thing we did in 67. Well, what did we do in 67? The same thing we did in 48. Well, what did we do then? Well, we don't remember. That was all a long time ago. And so that's like the famous line from that movie, from Givat Chalfon.
Josh,
you know that all of
1974, I went with an organization called the Defense of the Nature, whatever the Hebrew name was. And it was pretty safe. We had those open cards. We had like 12, 15, 16 people per tracks. And we actually slept at the monastery on the top and looked at the sunshine, the morning sunrise.
Me too.
my first trip, can you hear me? I don't.
Yes, yes.
Oh, my first trip to, it wasn't my first trip to Israel. I'd gone in the 50s with my mother when I was 5 or 3 or something. I don't know, I was 5. But the first trip to Eretz Israel was with Zamir Corral back in 70 also, actually. 70 and then again 73. That was, wow. Amazing.
We're all showing our age.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank God.
Hey, we're still here. Hello.
Right.
Josh, is the visa that's required from Egypt, or can you get it in Israel to go down to Sinai, with or without a guide?
You can get a visa in Israel to go to the Sinai. You cross through Eilat. You can go through there. And yeah, I mean, there's certain places that Israelis generally don't go in the Sinai that are a little bit more dangerous, that are still a little bit dangerous just because of just more recent, since the Arab Spring and whatever. But it's generally pretty safe to go to most places in the Sinai, and especially anywhere where there's Christian sites specifically, it's definitely really safe because generally the extremists don't mess with anything Christian because they don't want, the whole world coming down on them in that kind of way.
My wife and I went to Sharm el-Sheikh snorkeling on 73. You could just drive right in. I stopped at all the, all those stops. I forgot the stops already, but yeah, we stopped in all of them. It was amazing. You could just drive up, and on the way back, you were talking about the feeling you get in the Sinai, especially at night. We were driving home, and I found out later that it was illegal to drive after dark. So I didn't know that, so we went all the way back to Eilat. But stopped right, where you could get to Sinai, but I wasn't about to climb. I was 300 pounds, and it was nighttime, and I would have been killed. But we stopped the car, turned off the engine. You don't see, of course, because it was illegal anyway, so there was nobody driving. We were the only ones on the road, and just the air, all you hear is, and oh my God, that was a moment. You felt Hashem Yisbarach.
I was there when you can still climb and clamber, and I can't do that anymore. Now I need ropes and ladders, but the beauty has not changed, and the feeling of just awe is still there for me. And it has been a wonderful time of going back for 50, 60 years for me. And I thank you for the trip. Thank you very much.
So glad you were able to join us.
Fabulous. All right. Shalom uvracha. Take care, everybody. Thank you so much. By the way, we're going to be calling you in Eretz Israel pretty soon. God willing, we should be able to get out of here.
Okay.
I look forward to it.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you.
Hey,
Had a really great
thank
time
you
with
so
all, and
much.
it's great hearing all your memories about the Sinai Desert. It's one of the places I really want to go to next with my wife and daughter. I think it'll be really fun to go there. I also haven't been to Petra before, so I'd really love to go there too.
Oh, Petra,
Oh, that's fun.
unbelievable. But Sinai is better. I mean, Petra is a specific thing, but Sinai, oh my God.
Hey, Josh, I have a request. Where are you going to
Yeah.
take us next?
That's right.
Well, you're gonna have to ask my brother about that one. But there's a whole bunch of fun options that I've got up my sleeve. So,
Wonderful.
I can't
Look
wait to hear
forward
about
to
them,
it.
Josh.
so the shul has all the options of places to go next, and they'll pick.
You've done for a few
Fabulous.
places a Temple Mount tour, which is also interesting, and like a place that, like some people can't always have access to. I wonder if that's of interest.
Oh yeah, we should 100% do the Temple Mount tour. It is unbelievable.
The Galil and the lower Golan Heights, that entire northern part would be lovely as well.
The Golan Heights would be a really cool place too. There's some of my favorite sites in all of Israel are in the Golan.
Sounds like
I
a
love
summer
it.
series, Josh. June, July, and August. Get it ready.
Look,
You're on,
ready.
Josh.
It's ready. I'm on board. I'm on board.
But you,
You know,
David, and I will
I'm
talk
there.
afterwards.
Philippe, if we do a Golan tour, we might have to do like a wine tasting while we go.
I'm right there.
Oh, I like it.
Find it home. I'll bring it over.
Listen, it was so much easier climbing Sinai with you, Josh. I can't tell you.
I'm so glad. But we can't just do wine though, because there's also there's 2 breweries on the Golan and 1 whiskey distillery. So
I was gonna say, we
Not to
can do
worry.
milk and honey.
Milk and
Milk
honey.
and Honey's in Tel Aviv, but the Golan distilleries in the Golan, obviously.
You also have a zoo. You also have Roman ruins. You also have a bunch of history up in there. I mean, it's phenomenal. It's an incredible.
is.
Hey, go on, Fabby.
The coolest ancient synagogue in all of Israel is actually in the Golan that was recently excavated
Yes.
it was an earthquake that knocked everything down completely leveled, and using 3D imaging, they were able to kind of lift all of the stones exactly into the places that they were, like a 3D puzzle.
Oh my God.
Which
By the
is
way, you can do a virtual tour of the is it called the Black Canyon, I think, which
Mhm.
had some interesting problems last summer, but it was open before. And I went there a couple of years ago, and it was an incredible experience going down the canyon, jumping into the water, going to the waterfall, and doing a virtual tour for those that cannot go climbing down. It will be pretty phenomenal as well. So, and if you need money to go back, I'm there.
I
Hope
can even
to see some of you this evening. It was 7 o'clock.
even spit water at the camera to give some water experience in that way too.
Absolutely, it'd be fun.
Thank you, Josh.
Bye. Gotta go.
Bye, thank you.
Bye.
All right, thank you. That was great, Dave. Dave and Josh.
Yeah, David, you were great too.
I know. I worked really hard. I put in a lot of effort on this thing.
I just can't believe you didn't sing with your brother, man.
Oh, so it's funny. Philippe saw me singing and so take yourself off mute. And I was like, oh, but that will sound terrible for like both trying to sing at the same time.
I love the ukulele. Who knew that you had such talents, Josh?
That was great.
I don't really have many talents. My siblings have a lot better talents than I do.
I don't know. Your parents would argue that, I am sure. And I love the picture of you guys, Lady and Joel. Very cute. Very cute.
What? Did you guys like those Imanaba? Did it bring back some good memories?
You guys said you remember doing, just like Amy said, you remembered like waking up early in the morning and doing the hike.
Yep. I took a really crappy old Jeep ride with like 7 other people that kept overheating, and we had to stop all the time.
Amazing.
Great.
All right, well, I gotta run, but I'll see you guys later.
Now,
Bye,
take
everybody.
care,
Thanks
Josh.
for coming.
Ella Tov.
Laila Tov to all, or I guess Tzoraim Tovim to all of you guys.
Yes.
All right, bye.
All right, David, I'm off.
Bye, Amy. Love my
Later.
family.
Off to the next thing. Yep. Yeah, we're gonna end it for all. Woo.